This is Jimmy Church of Fade to Black, and you are in the future because you're listening to Cristina Gomez and Shifting the Paradigm.
Howdy, folks. This is Lou Elizondo, and you are listening to my very good friend Cristina Gomez on Shifting the Paradigm.
Hi, this is Ray Sobbs from the UNX Network, and you're listening to Shifting the Paradigm with the intrepid Cristina Gomez on the X.
You're listening to the UNX Network, KUNX-DB, Kansas City, Missouri.
Welcome to Shifting the Paradigm. I'm Cristina Gomez on the Paradigm Shifts channel and on the X, the new mainstream KUNX digital broadcasting talk radio. Are you ready for this? Because we're about to embark on an hour and a half of UFO shenanigans and paranormal adventures. Right here is where we look and think outside the proverbial box. We jump down those rabbit holes where you get a red Tic Tac instead of a red pill. First off, make sure you subscribe and share these shows on social media to those who you think are having their minds and eyes open to the reality of the UFO mystery. All of these shows are great primers, and in the push for more clarity, transparency, and disclosure, the more voices demanding answers, the better. For those listening on KUNX Talk Radio and affiliates, I have 3 other shows each week that only air on my YouTube channel. The Unknown Zone airs every Monday at 10 a.m. PST. This Monday was on the Mysteries of the Sphinx. Thursday is the Mysteries of Egypt at 2:30 p.m. PST with my co-host, Jimmy Church of Fade to Black Radio. And we are doing a part 3 because you picked it on a poll. On Fridays at 3 p.m. PST is Weekly Strange News. So definitely check out my website at strangeparadigms.com. My guest today is James Fox, the director of the new UFO film, Moments of Contact. Let's bring him in. James, welcome to Shifting the Paradigm. It's been an intense, not just a few days since your movie premiere, but an intense 1 or 2 years traveling, filming, and editing your groundbreaking documentary, Moment of Contact. How are you feeling now that it's finally out there? Have you been able to get some sleep?
No.
Still no sleep.
Feeling kind of broken a little bit. Very excited and happy, but it's been a very, very intense, particularly the last, because I did a screening in Arizona, then I did another one in Los Angeles, but then lots of interviews in between the two, and the excitement and everything else. It's hard to sleep. It's just hard to sleep. So if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I definitely got to have a lot of sugar and a lot of caffeine next to you to make it through the days.
I do exercise though. I like when I was in Arizona, I found a beautiful mountain to go hike because it's my sanctuary. Kind of, my meditation. I hike. I try to hike every day, but lately it's been a little tricky. Like this morning, I woke up with just fire alarms all day. Just, oh no, we need this for the story. We need that. And like immediately. We need the transcripts. But no, I do. I find hiking trails when I was in Runyon Canyon in LA, and that really helps a lot. And then at some point, I'll get some sleep and recover, probably for like a week or something.
Before we continue, how long do you think it'll take you to fully recover after these 1 or 2 years of filming and editing and premiering everything?
I would have to say, when I finished The Phenomenon, I don't want to sound melodramatic here, but and I'm being awfully serious, and I'm a pretty resilient guy. I was in a ball crying for like 3 or 4 days. My whole spinal cord, all my muscles were out. I couldn't walk barely. It was pretty intense. Like the push it took. And I remember thinking at one point, if this is what it takes to be successful, no wonder why more people don't make it, because this is almost killing me. And I'm a pretty resilient guy for the most part, you know? It's just really tough. I don't want to sound like I'm complaining, because I'm not. It's been a fantastic journey, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. But it takes a toll, for sure. It takes a toll.
We are going to get into your latest documentary, but first, before we dive into this new feature, for my younger audience in the podcast land and on YouTube, let's start by going back in time to your research and earlier documentaries. Your first documentary, 50 Years of Denial, came back in 1997. That was a time where the UFO subject was still kind of taboo, and it's been quite a journey since then. So, given the cultural changes in the way the UFO topic is now perceived, what are the main differences between then and now where the public film release and reception is concerned?
I would have to say the main difference between then and now is I don't get laughed at as often, and then you've got people like NASA and this very public UAP task force being talked about. Intelligence agencies are talking about the existence of UAPs. There's been official evidence acknowledged and verified. That's a big quantum leap in what I remember back in the 90s. I mean, we had a lot of I was in my 20s when I started, my mid 20s. And I had a lot of ridicule from family and friends. I mean, a lot. And I remember I used to say to people before we'd go to like a cocktail party, would you guys mind not talking about what I do? Because I don't feel like spending my night defending myself. I'm not out there like trying to convince anybody, or one thing or another. This has been my personal journey. I'm very curious. I really want answers. And I go out to the field and I meet with witnesses in different locations around the world. And I share the results of my investigations publicly in my documentaries. But it's my personal journey. And people can make what they like of it. I'm not, and I've said this 1,000 times, but I'm really not out there trying to get people to join my cult of believers. It's the last thing I'm trying to do. I just think that there's some very compelling firsthand eyewitness testimony, both civilian and military, that deserves attention.
And what was the exact trigger that got you started? What set you on the path of pursuing the truth about UFOs?
Well, oof, I had a friend that we went to high school together, and we kind of lost contact for a couple of years after high school, which tends to happen. We did a road trip together, and when we were 18, and then I didn't really see him again until I was like 22, 23, and I was apprenticing doing video production in Northern California, and he's we kind of meet back up again, and he starts talking about this crash of an alien spaceship in New Mexico and government cover-ups. And I mean, I remember thinking, oh my God, it's such a shame that I have to cut this guy loose. He's lost his mind. So and then I was, like I said, I was apprenticing in video production at this company, small company in Northern California. And one of my bosses, this guy, Richard Van Sickle, who I looked up to greatly. And I don't know, we were talking casually, and I said, yeah, my friend talked about this UFO thing and New Mexico in 1947, and he's like lost his mind. And Richard Van Sickle goes, you haven't heard about Roswell? Yeah, that happened. I mean, they actually announced it publicly. That's some real stuff. And I said, like, really? Anyway, long story short, I went to a couple conferences reluctantly, and I thought, maybe there's something to this. And I was in video production. I decided to make a movie on docs. Make a movie on UFOs. And so I did.
And it was just because of your friend who was practically excited about Roswell that got you inspired to start that journey of doing documentaries on UFOs. Like
pretty much. I mean, there was a lot of media attention. You had the Clinton administration was looking into UFOs. There was a congressman by the name of Stephen Schiff of New Mexico. He was getting lots of pressure from his constituents about the Roswell incident. So once I started to kind of pay attention, I saw that, there are some very credible people. Edgar Mitchell, Apollo 14 astronaut Edgar Mitchell, was talking about it. Nick Pope was still with the MOD in London. There was my family's English. So we saw some statements in England, in London. And I decided, gosh, this seems like kind of a potentially big story. And I'm going to delve in. And quite honestly, I'd expected to find out that we were probably, it's a big universe, probably getting periodic visitation, extraterrestrial or interplanetary. And that for whatever reason, the governments of the world decided to cover it up, maybe to get a handle on it. I don't know. And here I am all these years later. And I think it's far more complex than that, And I'm still pretty much totally in the dark.
So then, producing documentaries like 50 Years of Denial, Out of the Blue, I Know What I Saw, The Phenomenon, and now Moment of Contact, hearing stories and meeting with witnesses, how has it changed your perspective on the phenomenon, on the possibilities of them originating with a non human intelligence, and also how it has changed your life?
um, so the phenomenon is global. I've been to Russia, I've been to China, I've been to Australia and Africa and South America. I've done events with Leslie Kane, who was one of the authors of the New York Times article that broke the story about the secret Pentagon UFO program in 2017. So there are certain aspects of the phenomenon that I know beyond a shadow of doubt that I've concluded are real without any question. That you have these objects in our skies globally that don't have any control surfaces, wings, tail, visible means of propulsion. The shapes vary. Sometimes they're cigar shaped, sometimes they're disc shaped, sometimes they're sort of boomerang shaped, orbs, but they have the ability to hover. They can accelerate from a standstill to out of sight in the blink of an eye. They can do right angle turns at high speed. They fly rings around our fastest jets. And I honestly believe that, well, there's clearly an intelligence behind it. And people can argue with me and say that I'm wrong, and that's fair enough. But I don't think that the governments have any idea of who they are, where they come from, what they want.
And how has it changed your life?
Um, well, changed my life in the way that I feel like a lot smaller. I feel like, I don't know, pretty insignificant, like I'm a little granule of sand. I mean, it's kind of like we're everything and yet we're nothing. I don't know. I'm constantly kind of thinking about the big picture and how I fit in, how we fit in. One of the things I say quite often is I really feel like this story coming out would have a very unifying effect on all of us, on the human race. And we would no longer see ourselves as black, white, pink, yellow, Asian, African American, whatever. We'd see ourselves as one race, one species. And I thought that kind of what the world needs right now. And I just keep pushing for answers. I do the best I can, but honestly, I'm coming to terms with the fact that who knows? I don't know if we'll ever really know all the aspects of this elusive phenomenon,
And with pushing for the answers, your documentaries just get better and better with each one. To be honest with you, I thought the phenomenon was incredible. And I'm thinking, I don't know how James is going to one up this one. But let's talk about Moment of Contact, because my goodness, is it an incredible film? Honestly, while I've been only doing extensive UFO research for the last 2 years, this story in Varginha, Brazil in 1996 is as intense as the Colares Brazil case in 1977. Brazil is just honestly just a wild place to get some extraterrestrial interactions. So, how, or I guess, why did you laser focus on this particular UFO event?
It's kind of funny actually because I was making Out of the Blue in the late 90s. And my partner at the time, I had two partners, Boris Zuboff, another guy named Tim Coleman, who was a former BBC correspondent, very smart guy. And he said, we have got to look into this crash case in Varginha, Brazil, where apparently there were live aliens walking through the town that survived the crash. And I just was like, this guy's lost his mind. I mean, seriously, if you think I'm going to waste 1 second investigating an alleged UFO crash where aliens survived and they're walking through the town in broad daylight, you got to, reconsider everything. And I dismissed it so quickly, like that. And Tim, my partner, was, I don't know, he was kind of disturbed by that. It kind of ticked him off, but I didn't care. I was going to waste my time on that. Fast forward at least 11 years. It was like 2010, 2011. And I'm going to Brazil to talk about my film, I Know What I Saw, which I did based on a press conference event I did at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. with Leslie Kean. And I get a phone call from this guy, Jeff Sagansky, who's very high up on the food chain in the entertainment industry. You can look him up. I think he was like heads of Sony Pictures at one point. But in any case, he's like, oh, you're going to Brazil, James? He goes, God, you got to look into that Varginha case. And I said, oh, you mean the one where the UFO allegedly crashed and the aliens were alive walking through the town? Sure, Jeff, I'll look into that for you. Click. Yeah, that's not going to happen. And I arrived in Brazil with no intention of looking into it, not for 1 second. I was like, there's no way an event of that magnitude could occur and everyone not know about it. It just seemed too unbelievable. But in any case, while I was there in Brazil, just coincidentally, by complete happen chance, I met a couple of witnesses at the conference that I was at. And that, I don't know, that kind of piqued my interest. And then I went back to Brazil, and then I went back to Brazil, and then I went back to Brazil over, I don't know, the next 11 years. And of course, now I'm absolutely convinced that a UFO did crash and that there were occupants, beings recovered.
So, I mean, that's pretty interesting. You were able to speak to the ladies who were young at the time that encountered this unusual looking extraterrestrial back in 1996, but you had actually spoken to them about 10 years or so ago about the incident for National Geographic. So at that time, did you foresee or perceive that their story needed greater research and world exposure, or did the concept grow from there to create this film, Moment of Contact?
Well, so I was pretty convinced the girl's testimony coming within 8 to 10 feet of this sentient being was extremely compelling to me. I believed them beyond a shadow of doubt. What I didn't have was a link between the UFO and the occupants, or even that there was a UFO involved. But we put that to bed on our last trip to Brazil. We had to find Carlos de Souza. He was the crash witness that actually, because we have some other farmers, Oralina and Eurico de Freitas, and they had seen a UFO in distress, or an unknown object in distress. It was cigar shaped, about the size of a big school bus with a gash in the side of it, and white vapor coming out the back side of it. They didn't describe it as like fire of a smoke. It was different. It was like a white vapor. Then we have Carlos de Souza, who'd apparently given one very brief statement on camera to a guy named Claudio Covo, who's a Brazilian UFO researcher, and then he vanished for 26 years. And Marco and fellow Brazilian UFO researchers located him and convinced him for the first time since 1996 to come forward. And that, and then we got some other eyewitness testimony. And, I tell people, don't believe a word I say, because if I were you, I wouldn't believe this story either. But suspend judgment and listen to the eyewitness testimony and see your opinion might change. It's a preponderance of eyewitness accounts. It's like pretty much the whole town has some piece of the puzzle.
We are going to get into that in more detail on other people that you spoke to in the film. But just to backtrack just a little bit, what was it like to contact the female witnesses after all of this and to get them to agree to be a part of your newest film? I ask this because I would imagine that they might have wanted to put it all behind them at this point in their lives so many years later.
Every single witness that appears in Moment of Contact, there's a backstory to how we got them to come forward that honestly, if we had 12 hours, I might be able to share it all with you. It was very difficult, very difficult. People are tired of the ridicule. They're tired of just the questioning, the whole thing. We managed to convince the witnesses enough that we were here to take their stories, their accounts seriously and report on it seriously and not try to, explain it away. Look, we're not saying what it was. We're not saying what it wasn't. We're just literally providing a platform to allow the audience, the witnesses to say what they saw and then allow the audience to make up their own mind. And no one person's got all the pieces to the puzzle. It's like, you have one account here from a doctor, you got another doctor an account, you've got one guy that sees, a couple of people that see the object in distress, you got one guy that sees a similar object it actually impact the ground. When you put all those pieces together, which we attempted to do for Moment of Contact, it's quite clear that an unknown object crashed and that beings connected to this object survived and were captured.
Before we get to the break, for those that aren't familiar with the story or haven't seen the images, can you detail how this entity looked from the testimonies given?
Yeah, so there were, a number of eyewitnesses, but the most credible, in my opinion, were three women, Katya, Valkyria, and Liliani. Liliani and Valkyria were sisters, 14 and 16 years old. Katya was 21. She was a friend. And they were taking kind of a little shortcut through this field and up against this, what's that? Not brick, but it's a cinder block wall with some graffiti on it. I guess the graffiti initially had caught their eyes. It's about 3:00 in the afternoon, January 20th, 1996, maybe 3:30. And they saw what initially they thought was like maybe a statue or something of a creature that had brown, oily skin, spindly arms and legs, maybe about 4 feet tall, big head, big red eyes, little ridges, couple like 2 or 3 ridges on the head, slit for a mouth. I don't think he even had a nose. And it was kind of slouched down with his arms between the legs, kind of down like this up against a cinder block wall. They're all looking at this thing, or what the hell are we looking at? I think one of them gasped, one of the women. And then the creature just turned from this point and looked them right in the eyes. 2, it was feeble, it was weak, it was scared. 2, Katya remained frozen in her tracks. Liliani and Valkyria ran, screaming. And Katya locked eyes on this creature for several seconds at 8 or 10 feet away in broad daylight. And there was a level of communication because I said to her, like, during that moment of contact, and that's how I came up with the title of the film, was because that's what it all boils down to. When she got eye contact with this sentient being, what kind of communication was there? What did she feel? You know what I mean? And she said it was scared, it wanted help, and feeling vulnerable and weak. And then the two, one of the sisters, the older one who was 16 years old, ran back, grabbed Katya, yanked her out of there. And then about 2 hours later, that's when the second capture took place with a military police officer by the name of Marco Chirizi.
it's truly an unbelievable story. And James, I have so many more questions going into detail on this encounter and the weeks and days that came afterward, but we are coming towards a break. We'll be right back.
Gigawatt paranormal powerhouse, KUNX-DB, the X.
This is Micah Hanks of the Micah Hanks program right here on KUNX. And right now, you're having your paradigm shifted by the one and only Cristina Gomez.
Your new source for alternative talk radio on the internet. The X.
Howdy, folks. This is Lou Elizondo, and you are listening to my very good friend Cristina Gomez on Shifting the Paradigm.
Do you have an interest in the paranormal? Then you'll love the unxnetwork.com. The X is your streaming audio and video for everything supernatural, strange, and mysterious, like UFOs, Bigfoot, ghosts, and so much more. From hosts like Jimmy Church, Whitley Strieber, Micah Hanks, and Cristina Gomez. Visit the unxnetwork.com show page for a complete list of all the paranormal programs you'll find on the X. Be sure to follow us on Twitter for updates at KUNXDB. Follow our Facebook group, UNX Network. Find the podcast on Spotify, iHeart, Audible, and Apple Podcast. It's time.
It's new.
It's the X.
So, you love talk radio? Then you'll love TalkStreamLive.com. TalkStream Live is always on, 24/7 with the best streaming talk shows. Find your favorite talkers and discover some new ones. It's free, readily available online or on mobile with any smartphone or tablet. Finding your favorite talk shows all in one place has gotten a whole lot easier. Just go to TalkStreamLive.com. Be sure to download the free apps from Google Play or the iTunes App Store.
Explaining
The unexplained.
the new unxnetwork.com.
Hi. This is Race Hobbs, head of programming at the new UNX Network, and you're locked on Shifting the Paradigm with the intrepid Cristina Gomez on the X.
This is Jimmy Church of Fade to Black, and you are in the future because you're listening to Cristina Gomez and Shifting the Paradigm.
I'm gonna
Welcome back. With me today is James Fox. In the film Moment of Contact, you go into detail on quite a few things. One being is that there were two entities that were actually allegedly seen, one alive and one dead. You spoke to a cardiologist who was working at the time who had looked at an officer's heart that allegedly was in contact with one of the creatures, and then the officer died. What did the doctor tell you in regards to that?
So we'll back up. For the first time in any reporting on this Varginha incident, January 1996 Varginha incident, I fly drones. And I flew my drone above the area where the girls came within 8 to 10 feet of this live creature. And I flew the drone up. This will be relevant in a second. I flew the drone up a little higher to get kind of the whole city block, like the whole region. And to our astonishment, we came to the realization that the military blockade was like a block away, that we had witnesses talking about the military blockade. Then we had witnesses talking about the capture zone. It was all within a few blocks. At about 5:30, January 20th, 1996, about 2 hours, 2.5 hours, something like this, after the girls came in direct contact with this being, there was a capture that took place. And there were two military officers on patrol. One of them, his name was Eric Lopes, and the other one was Marco Chiriz. They were told to be on the lookout for something very unusual. Not like, hey, a UFO crashed and there are these aliens walking around town. They were not told that. Just be on the lookout. So they were. And 2 or 3 blocks from where the girls came into encounter, they're driving down this one street, and this strange creature comes across the car in front of them. Eric Lopes locks the brakes up. Marco Chiriz, with 23 years old, without a second's hesitation, runs outside and grabs this thing. And it was apparently didn't put up much of a fight. It was pretty weak, very oily, spindly arms, legs, brings it into the car. I know this sounds nuts. Puts it in the back seat, and I believe he had it on his lap. And they took it to a clinic initially, and the doctor came out and looked, well, I don't know what the hell you have. Get it out of here. I don't want this thing anywhere near me. And they go to another hospital called Regional. And that's apparently where they dropped this thing off. A couple days later, Marco's got this like oil on his skin. It's smelly, and he's got rubbing alcohol, according to people that knew him. And within a couple of weeks, he fell ill. He took himself into the ER. And he died. He got an infection, and the doctor couldn't do anything to save his life. Healthy 23-year-old man. We interviewed the doctor, Dr. Cesario, for the first time on camera ever. And he basically confirmed that Marco revealed aspects of the story to him in order to kind of save his own life. And that he gave Marco literally through the kitchen sink in terms of antibiotics at this general infection. His body his immune system shut down, and he died.
It's a crazy story. As you can tell, I'm nearly lost for words.
I'm right there with you.
But when you had spoken to that cardiologist, it was a pretty compelling story. And just recently, you brought up Eric Lopes. You wanted to interview him, but it didn't really go as planned. What happened?
So Eric Lopes was the driver, and as the passenger, Marco Chiriz, during the second capture is deceased, the only living witness to that incident is Eric Lopes. But Marco Chiriz's own family were unable to get Eric to comment publicly about this case, about his involvement. For 26 years, I think they'd exhausted all other possibilities. I went to the mayor of Varginha. He offered his assistance. He was the active mayor. He wasn't retired. And I thought, well, this guy's got access to just about everybody. I said, hey, could you help us find Eric Lopes? And he said he would, and he did. And he hooked us up with a military corporal, I think based at the time in Varginha, now retired. I do an introduction with him. And then he has a son who's a lawyer and he used to be a politician, very famous. I'm standing on the streets with his son Homolo, and there are cars beeping and people waving as they drive by. The guy was like, very famous in the town of Varginha. So they offered to take us an escort out to Eric Lopes' house. People had criticized us for what we did, but honestly, every other possible scenario had been exhausted. The only one left was to go to this guy's house and see if you can get, it's called doorstepping, see if you can get a non-camera statement. At the last minute, we meet up in the town square. We formulate a plan. This guy who's got a black Mercedes, the lawyer who's at the behest of the mayor, Verge, is going to take us out to Eric Lopes' house and show us the address and then take off. The last minute I said, I stopped my car right as we were leaving, and I jumped out with the translator, and I went up to Homolo, who had the black Mercedes, and I said, would you mind walking up to his door with us, not just dropping us off and leaving? Something just told me that would be a better idea. So honestly, I think that probably saved my life. So we drive to Eric Lopes' house. We pull in, and he'd been living off the beaten path. I mean, you have to see the film, but the first thing we call out Eric is, Eric, and this gentleman appears in the window, looking kind of down on us, got his arms up on the window, and he's looking down at us. If you're here to talk about the ET, he's never going to talk. And he was referring to himself in the third person. And then he said, I suggest you get out of here before I remove you all with bullets. And I don't speak Portuguese. I do speak some French, a little Spanish, but I wasn't aware what was going on. I didn't know who it was. I didn't know if it was Eric Lopes, somebody else. And there was this kind of moment of confusion, and then ultimately he reveals that he is Eric Lopes, and then he's going to shoot everybody again if we didn't leave immediately. I kept trying to get questions in. It's a pretty intense scene in the movie, but basically he admits that he was Eric Lopes, and if we were there to talk about the ET, he said we didn't bring up the ET, he did. And if you're here to talk about the ET, he's never going to talk, something like that. And removes. I told us 3 times he's going to kill everybody there. So
you could feel the tension through the screen when watching the film. Now, I cannot imagine what it was like to actually stand there in his presence, but for the most part, you had a few other interactions that were a lot easier than with Eric Lopes. But you do have an incredible story of when you interviewed an ex-Air Force brigadier by the name of Jose Carlos Padera that was willing to speak to you about Colares, Brazil, and the other cases there in and around Brazil, but not about Varginha. So what happened in that interaction?
God, I have a photograph of him, which meeting with him, which I'd happily share. But let me just say one more thing, going back to Eric Lopes, because this is important. I wasn't sure what was being said. It was all lots of slang, and they were speaking very quickly. But I stood across from Eric Lopes. I'll never forget it. And I looked at this man's face, and I'd never seen a face like it in my life. It looked like his face, like the tension, the trouble, the profound effects that this whole thing has had on him. I'm looking at this face, and I kept thinking to myself, man, this guy has been harboring some kind of secret or something. Like, you could just see his face. It said everything in his face. And I remember just going, I've never seen a face like this in my life. Unfortunately, Dave West, our camera guy, had the wrong lens. He wasn't really anticipating what was going to happen. And he couldn't get a zoom in on not only that, but Eric Lopes was looking at the cameraman the whole time in the window. And he had one hand down below the window frame and the other finger going like this, like, turn these cameras off, don't film me. But that was a very, very intense, the look on his face, I'll never forget it. It's etched in my memory, and I don't even know if I could find a word in the English language to describe. It just looked like somebody who's been hiding a secret or just just having a burden on their shoulders for all that time. It's pretty intense. What was the other question you wanted me to get to? Moving on to, was it the doctor or Military X? Sorry.
Yes, it was Jose Carlos Padera.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Tell us the interaction that you had with him.
So this didn't go in the movie. We met with him in 2014, I'm going to say, and he said, "I'll talk with you." He was a brigadier. He was high up on the Brazilian Air Force, big shot. He's like, "I'll talk to you about UFOs in Brazil. UFOs are real. I can go into a few accounts, 1986, 1977, Colares, UFOs over Sao Paulo. But if you ask me about Varginha, this interview is over." That's weird. Okay. So Marco and I were dying to know. We did the interview, and it's a great interview. And at the end, we shut all the cameras off. And I walked up to him with Marco, and I said, "Sir, you have my word that there are no recording devices going, there are no cameras running, no audio, nothing of any sort. Please, could you just please tell us about Varginha? Please." And he didn't say anything. And he's walking back to his car, and he had a driver waiting for him. And Marco and I were just literally like this, like just, and begging and pleading. And I think the door was open, the back seat of the car, and in went Jose Carlos Barrera. And he sat down in the back seat. And before he closed the door, he looked at both Marco and myself, and he said, "It happened." Closed the door, and off he went. So Marco and I had a pretty high level confirmation from a very high ranking Brazilian Air Force officer in 2014, 2013 at the earliest, but it was probably 2014.
What was it like having that confirmation on this case that you didn't make a movie about it yet until just recently? So you were sitting on that for quite a few years. What was that like?
It keeps you going. That's about it. It keeps you going. Every
Keeps
time you get like doubt and you can't like get these witnesses to come forward. I mean, we went years. Marco spent, 7, 8, 9, 10 years getting certain witnesses to come forward for this film. And it just you got that card in your back pocket, and that keeps you going. This is the best way I can describe it. And Marco felt the same way. We had a level of confirmation from a high level Brazilian Air Force officer. There's no way, neither one of us, look, man, there's no way he was lying. He wasn't trying to go on the record. He just looked at us and said, "It happened." Yeah. So that was pretty. He died. I wouldn't share this now because he died a couple of years ago. But and I've got photographs of the meeting, which I'm happy to share with you if you want.
Yeah, I would definitely
Yeah.
love them.
Yeah.
What evidence has been left after the incident that you were able to see or get your hands on?
Uh, let's see. Well, the holy grail of evidence would be photographic, right? Videotape, photographs. And we know beyond a shadow of doubt that there is photographic evidence of this being. But I'll remind your audience that just because you've located something, it doesn't mean you're able to get your hands on it. I'm not saying that it's not going to happen, but it's people without evidence were threatened. So you can imagine what was said to people with evidence, or maybe the military doesn't even know they have that evidence. I don't know. It's hard to say. But yeah, that's the holy grail of evidence. And don't think for a moment that there aren't all hands on deck going after every lead.
Well, you do have some pieces. For instance, one of the doctors that inspected this entity's body, you were actually able to interview the sister, and she went into detail on how the doctors wanted to bury the body as soon as possible. And she also had a death certificate of the alleged extraterrestrial, which you demonstrated on camera. On that death certificate, there were mentions of strange substances in the body.
Yeah.
What were they?
Unknown. It was unknown to doctors at the time. I think it was like 8% of some kind of bacteria or something. I actually have the death certificate. If you want, I'm happy to share it with you. But yeah, it was like 8% of basically unknowns that they were not able to identify. That was completely just, we don't know. We've never seen anything like this. We don't know what it is. We don't know where it came from. And it may have killed Marco Therese. Yeah. Because his body wasn't reacting. It was a general infection that he got from a scrape. And there's lots of talk about that possibly could be that he got it during the capture. He got a little scratch on his arm, and that infection killed him.
What are your thoughts on that?
What's crazy? I mean, the whole thing is just crazy. I mean, look, Dr. Roger Lear, who was really well known for surgically removing alleged what do you call implants. Roger Lear went to Brazil in 2002, and he videotaped the entire investigation, and he got cooperation with a number of researchers. He got to meet with Marco Terese's wife, who's been unreachable ever since. So we have a statement from her in the film. We managed to track down Marta Tavares, who's the sister. We managed to track down the Dr. Cesario, who worked on Marco Teresi. And we got the death certificate. And it's just probably more questions than there are answers.
That seems to be the case with literally anything that you research in the field. You come in with a bunch of questions, hoping to find those answers, and then you're left with more questions every single time.
Pretty much. But what we do know is still spectacular.
This is very true.
Yeah.
I think one of the most compelling scenes, in my opinion, was when you spoke to Carlos de Sousa when he saw the UFO crash. What was it like to speak with him? I mean, he broke down crying after he found the location. Why was that?
We'd probably been in Brazil for maybe 3 days, 4 at the most. And we met up with Carlos de Souza, sorry, I always mispronounce his name, in Sao Paulo. He's a history teacher at a university and also an ultralight pilot. That was one of the reasons why he came upon the UFO crash. He was driving from Sao Paulo to the state of Minas Gerais, which is about 4 or 5 hours to the north, to meet up with some of his ultralight buddies, and they were going to go fly ultralight planes. It was very, very early in the morning, but he had not been back to the site in 26 years. And so when we got there, I thought we were going to just roll up and find it. We drove around. We drove around back and forth, and I'm thinking, oh my God, our first significant witness, and the guy can't even find the crash site. This is terrible. Like, we're off to a terrible start, so discouraging. And he kept saying, I could see a white house. And I said, well, how sure are you that you could see a small white house and the debris field at the same time? He kept saying 110%. There was a debris field and there was a small white house off in the distance. No. So I got the drone out and I flew the drone up high, and behind a whole wall of trees was a small white house. So all the trees had grown up really high. We've been looking for like an hour and a half, maybe up to 2 hours. And I found the spot and I said, this has got to be the spot. This has got to be the White House. It's exactly what he described. And lo and behold, we pointed him in that direction and he took off running like a banshee. We're all trying to catch him. I remember the cameraman screaming like, slow down, because he was trying to catch up so he can capture this moment. But it just, it unraveled. It unfolded as it unfolded. And the whole thing happened. We just happened to have the cameras rolling and got that scene when first time back at the site since 1996. It's pretty intense.
Everything was so raw. The emotions felt so like you were there. And for him to be taking forever to find the crash site, finding it, just sitting down and just starts crying. It wasn't a very it was a very emotional scene in the film, and I'm just like, that's so beautifully done. I mean, that's what you want to accomplish, is to make your audience feel the emotions that you want them to feel.
Mhm.
So I
Yeah, I
thought it
mean,
was good.
yeah, no, it was a very, it's funny because David West, who's been my DP for some time now, and he's a seasoned photographer. He's done stuff in the White House. He's been all around the world. I mean, my God, the guy is like, and he said, "You don't understand. In my 45-year career, that those moments occur, so rarely. The fact that this guy, was crying out of both eyes. He kept saying, and you could see him almost reliving the incident when he was there. He was in another world. It was remarkable, and we were so fortunate to have captured it as it happened. There wasn't a staged shot in that entire movie. Everything happened. It was like, as it happened, and I think it shows. I mean, you could feel when something's.
So then what was it like going into a country where you didn't speak the language? And especially in Carlos's instance, being in communication with him, attempting to speak with him and understand and to follow his story that he was trying to share with you.
Well, for every witness, I mean, I'm so keen on understanding what people are saying. I'm super curious and I really want to know what they saw. And so even when I went to China, I was like, learning the basics in Chinese, like within an hour of arriving. And the same thing with, I have this hyper level of focus when I'm in the field where I can like slow the language down and really pick out words and and get a certain percentage and just enough so I get an idea because I have to understand what's being said. It's like really important to me, you know. And but it was challenging, and editing in Portuguese, very challenging. And I'm a slow reader. I don't like reading subtitles. I don't like the way they've done. I don't like the way they put like 4 or 5 lines all at one, and I'm like trying to keep up, and then it's like gone, and then another one comes up, and so I catered these subtitles in this film to my level of reading. My distribution company was terrified. They were like, Americans don't like to read subtitles. It's going to be terrible. I was like, I don't like reading subtitles either, but I catered them to my level of reading, which I just don't like. I'm a good reader. I just don't read that fast. I read slowly. So I did slow and one. And it doesn't seem it's a non-issue at this point. There's been not one comment like, "Oh, I can't read up the subtitles." No.
No, when I saw it, I thought it was very easy to follow. Now I have one more question before we get into our next break, and I want to mention that I thought it was super awesome that you were able to ask people on the streets their thoughts on the 1996 incident and then showed it on film. What did the majority of people that you spoke to say about it?
Um, they'd all like a lot of people. Surprisingly enough, you go to the downtown square in Varginha. It's like, oh, my cousin saw something. My mother saw the military presence. My brother knew somebody, or my neighbor. Like, my God, an extremely large percentage of the people that we spoke to had some piece of the puzzle and and believed that it happened. A large percentage of the town of Varginha believed it happened, and they embrace the story. They've got like statues, and they got that big disc thing. It's pretty crazy, pretty crazy. It's pretty crazy that the whole world doesn't know about it. That's what shocks me more than anything else. You can have an incident of that magnitude, potential magnitude, and like everyone not know. You know?
That's not the case anymore. Now with your film, the world is becoming familiar with this case. And you're right, it's so unbelievable that for quite some time, a few decades now, it just wasn't a popular topic, even in the UFO field. It's not a common topic. And then all of a sudden, you see this film or you do the research on the location, and you're like, "What? This is real?" And it's just as mind blowing as I had mentioned earlier as the Colares Brazil incident, which is insane. And
Mhm.
and it's it's so crazy that it's almost unbelievable, but there are so many testimonies. There are so many documents of drawings, photography, and film as well that you just can't brush it off.
You know, there's a very big difference between unknown objects in the sky and beings on the ground,
That's right.
particularly if they're captured, because that's the definitive piece of evidence. Look, we can talk all we want about unknown objects in the sky. All right, great. It did this maneuver that I felt that eliminated the possibility of something conventional. Fantastic. That sounds outstanding. Okay, cool. But when you have witnesses describing beings on the ground, that's very different.
Those stories are very, very rare. Well, we're going to continue this conversation, but we are coming towards a break. We'll be right back after this.
Gigawatt paranormal powerhouse, KUNX DB, The X.
This is Jimmy Church of Fade to Black, and you are in the future because you're listening to Cristina Gomez and Shifting the Paradigm.
I want to thank all of you for listening to The X. But did you know you can watch live streaming video and catch your favorite video casts on the UNX Network YouTube channel?
Wow, you mean I can watch the X shows anytime?
That's right. Watch any show, anytime, even binge watch your favorite programs.
Which shows are on the UNX Network YouTube channel?
You can watch Most Haunted with Dan Terry, Entity Voices, Paranormal Evidence, Paranormally Blonde, and Unexplained Phenomena Australia, and many more. Also, be sure and catch live coverage of special events and special broadcasts from the UNX Network.
That's great. I'm going to subscribe to the UNX Network channel right now.
Awesome. You can find everything you need to know about the YouTube channel at unxnetwork.com. That's unxnetwork.com. It's your one-stop shop for everything unexplained. It's the new mainstream. It's the UNX Network.
Explaining
The unexplained.
the new unxnetwork.com.
Are you ready to read about true paranormal events? UNX Media publishes nonfiction books about UFOs, ghosts and haunted places, time anomalies, cryptid creatures, and more. Just like KUNX DB Radio, it's all about unexplained phenomena. Visit www.unxmedia.com to see our list of great book titles by Debbie Ziegelmeyer, Gene Walker, Devin Listrom, Wayne Lawrence, Bill Spicer, and yours truly, Margie Kay. That's unxmedia.com.
Gold loves chaos, uncertainty, and disarray. History shows us what gold does when people aren't sure about the government, the stock market, their jobs, or their retirement savings. Our national debt is skyrocketing. Gold and other precious metals are a defense measure against inflation and a stock market that might take years to recover. So what can you do right now to protect yourself? Call United Gold Group. We offer gold and other precious metals delivered securely within 72 hours. Are you worried about the stock market? We can also help you set up a real gold or silver IRA or a 401k. Safe and secure. United Gold Group makes gold ownership affordable. Call now and get up to $2,500 in free gold or silver with a qualified IRA. Call 800-753-8534. That's 800-753-8534 or visit unitedgoldgroup.com.
liked how you brought the old with the new in the film, showing original interviews in 1996 of witnesses, along with showing interviews and research conducted by the late Robert Lear and Stanton Freeman. What made you want to take that route?
And Dr. John Mack as well.
And Dr. John Mack, of course.
Because I think it's important for people to understand that this did make an impact. This did make global news. It just didn't make, other than one article in the Wall Street Journal by a guy named Matt Moffat, it wasn't reported on in the media in the United States at all. There were some serious researchers, again, like Dr. John Mack, Harvard psychiatrist. There was Dr. Roger Lear, and there was, what other archival footage did I have? Well, I think it was just those two, now that I'm thinking about it. Yeah, it was just those two. And then we had dug up, so there was a very famous Brazilian UFO researcher. He's also an engineer. His name is Claudio Covo. He has since deceased, but his daughter connected with us, and she opened up his archives to us, and we managed to get, taped testimony, media, archived media reels and things of that nature. And then it was just fun to obviously match the 1996 material up with the witnesses 26 years later. I thought it was really kind of fun to juxtapose the two, because this was talked about and this was investigated and this was headline news in other parts of the world, just not really in the United States.
You were able to speak with doctors, the three main witnesses, people who saw the craft in the sky, Carlos, who saw the crash, military officials, and even those in Brazilian politics. Who else did you want to speak to, but that you weren't able to?
I don't remember his name. I feel terrible saying this, but he was the president of Brazil in 1996. It escapes me, and we got close to him, very, very close. And I ran out of time, and I had to come back to the United States. We probably would have gotten him on camera. So that was one. There was another gentleman that we were about to meet with that was also stationed at Eza military base, which was the point of operations for all the stuff that went on. And we were maybe a day away from meeting him when either the people we had just met with or the people that we're about to meet with got phone calls from Eza military base, kind of creepy. And, hey, how you doing? You still living at this address? How's your family? Hey, there's a documentary film crew from the United States. Have they contacted you? Did you reach out to them? Did they reach out to you? That kind of stuff. Spooky. So we were told at that point, we were happy to have gotten what we'd already gotten and just leave us alone, let the situation cool off for 6 months. They didn't threaten them at all, but that's the types of questions they were asking.
Has that happened to you personally as well? Something similar to that?
No, no. I just got spooked a couple times, but I was spooked. I was spooked because we had just met with Eric Lopes. We were stirring up the hornet's nest. We were really poking around. We're asking questions with cameras downtown. We're knocking on doors. We're going to former military base people. We were digging deep, and when those phone calls started happening, when Eric Lopes threatened to shoot everybody, I got spooked. I'm not gonna lie. I got an 8-year-old son at home. I got spooked.
So then how, in your opinion, was Brazil able to silence the story with so many witnesses? Because even to this day, this case hasn't been hugely known since your movie was released.
The military witnesses was fairly easy. They were still in the military. They said the consequences of violating your security oath, secrecy oath, would be extremely severe. They were unsuccessful in silencing all of the civilian witnesses. Some of them, yes, not all of them. The girls refused. The three primary researchers, there was Uberajado Rodriguez. He did a 180. Hector Peccaccini. he vanished for 18 years. And then Claudio Covo died. Dr. Roger Lear, the American researcher, he died. And then you've got Dr. John Mack, and he died. So I don't, other than actually Dr. Roger Lear never released the tapes that he shot, but he did write a short book on the incident. I mean, yeah.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, so the military threatened their own, right? Military police. Now the firemen, fire department, the local media was silenced. They said if they asked one more question, we have them on camera talking about it. The military said if you ask one more question, you're all going to jail. The firemen and the military police are part of the military. So if you're in the fire department or in the police department, that's connected to the military. So those guys were silenced. Eric Lopes was silenced. Marco Treese was dead. The media was told if you ask one more question, you're all going to jail. Well, they did a pretty good job.
It's always that threat factor that works its magic, it seems like.
Well, one thing that we did get, which I thought was some insight. So Marta Tavares, she's the sister of the deceased military police officer, Marco Treese. She said that her mother had a visit from the Brazilian military, who confirmed to the mother of the deceased military officer, Marco Treese, that the story was true. He really did capture this being. And that if the story came out, if they revealed what they knew, that society would collapse. That's what she was told in 1996. Is that a justification for secrecy? Maybe. I don't know. Yeah, maybe.
That society would collapse. Let's continue with that thought. What do you think about that? Do you think that if this information was made completely public, everyone knew about it, that society would collapse? Or do you think it would unite us or something else?
Well, I mean, I know about it, and my society's not collapsing. But I met, and I'm just going to, I've said this before, I'll say it again. I don't care at this point, but I met with Robert Bigelow. Robert Bigelow has had contracts with the U.S. government. He was part of, he had that organization, that intellectual scientific heavyweights, NIDS, BASS, OSAP, ultimately ATIP. He is a billionaire. He was trying to put, he had Bigelow Aerospace. He was trying to put these inflatable capsules as habitable zones that were lightweight up into space. I know he was working with Elon Musk at some point. Very credible in the way that he would certainly have access to some of the information that he shared with me. When I did a film called I Know What I Saw, I got an email from his secretary. And she said, Mr. Bigelow saw your movie, wanted to congratulate you on a job well done. So I reached out, and long story short, I got a lunch date with him. And he said to me in probably 2009, maybe 2010, that they had done some studies, I guess, on how this reality would impact the world. And I'm not saying that I believe this or I don't believe this, but this is what he told me. He said that if you take every scandal in the history of like politics in the world and you multiply that by 1 million, that would be the equivalent impact that the economy, financial markets, religion, all collapse if this story came out.
That's pretty extreme.
Personally, I don't really believe that, but that's what he told me. I don't know.
That's an extreme statement. Coming back just a little bit, what was the most compelling or chilling thing you've learned about doing your latest documentary? What keeps you up at night in relations to this mystery in Brazil?
probably the first time ever that I report on these alleged Men in Black characters. I'd heard about them for decades, and I'd avoided them like the plague because I thought it was such a credibility killer. You start talking about these Men in Black coming and silencing and coercing the witnesses. But I'd heard about them time and time again. But for some reason, when the mother of those two girls talked about these men showing up at her house, I felt compelled for the first time in my career to finally report on these alleged MIBs. And I did. And that's kind of creepy. If you listen to what she said, if you listen to what Carlos de Souza said in the movie, the visits that they had, it's kind of spooky,
It can be, and the fact that they also have all of your information on file makes it that much more scary.
Yeah.
Now, is or was that specific area of Brazil, Virginia, a UFO hotspot? Also, in the time period after the event, were there subsequent UFO sightings in the area? And I ask this because I'm curious about what should be logical that these creatures surely they'd be searching for their members of their race, right?
It's a very good question. I want to go back for a moment before I address this with Carlos de Souza, because these men in suits that approached him, they didn't threaten him directly. They said, "We suggest you don't talk about what you saw. You didn't see anything. If you do, things are going to get very weird for you." I thought that was an interesting way. Weird for you. Like, weird for me. Okay. It's kind of just like kind of spooky. Getting back to this other thing. So we were staying in a nice gated community just outside Varginha. We had lots of gear and photographic equipment, and we're poking around, and we just thought, let's get something with a little bit of security, just so we could put our minds at rest at night. Not that we feel like there were a bunch of thieves in Varginha, but it was like, anywhere we would have want to be secure for all the stuff, all the gear we had and the commotion that we're making. And, we're knocking on doors. Now the owners of that location had some fellow friends that were doctors that lived in the town of Varginha. And as it turns out, they lived within a couple blocks of where the girls encountered and where the military officers captured the being, allegedly. This family agreed to meet with us, not go on camera, to meet with us. I didn't realize that. I thought they were willing to go on camera. When we got to their house, there was a whole family. It was the husband, the wife, and the daughter. And they were like, "Oh no, we said we'd meet with you, not that we go on camera." Long story short, we talked them into going on camera, provided we disguise their faces. So we did. We filmed from the back. And quite honestly, I was expecting them to talk about this like, UFO they saw crash. That's not what they talked about. They talked about this disc-shaped object that was hovering right over their house, that was looking for something. And it was later in the evening, late, like 10 o'clock, maybe later. They said it was looking for something. It was doing a grid search. And I kept saying, "Are you sure it was it was definitely looking for something?" They all watched it for like 15 minutes as it flew over the area where the girls came into contact with that being. Okay. They were looking for something. And we had aerial footage of the encounter where that location where the girls took place. And I'd gone up just high enough where, to our amazement, we're in the edit studio one night. We're like, "Well, wait a minute. The house that we're at right now is just a couple blocks away." And we get lifted up and you could see where the capture happened, where the alleged encounter happened, and where this family lived. And there was an object later that evening, past 10 o'clock in the evening. They're out getting a pizza delivery, that was doing a grid search for 15 to 20 minutes. The entire family watched this thing looking for something, flying at treetop level. We had chills. Not very many people in the movie get that aspect of it, but they were looking for their people. No question. It had to be.
Those witnesses that you spoke to that allegedly saw the craft, both public and military. Have you at any point got a description of the UFO itself, aside from it being cigar shaped, which could also be interpreted as a tic tac shape, maybe? What other details do you know about it?
You mean the one that crashed?
The one that crashed, but also the one that you had just mentioned about
The one,
these witnesses seeing it go grid like.
yeah. So the one that was, it was a typical disc. The one that was looking for something, it was rotating on the bottom and it was disc shaped. The one that crashed was much larger, the size of a good sized school bus, maybe a little bigger, and it was cylindrical, and it was metallic, and it had a huge gash in the side. It had no wings, no tail, like a cigar, like a big cigar. Yeah, and we also interviewed people in town that saw an object that they claimed was circular, spinning on the bottom, that was looking for something.
My goodness.
I know, it
That
was crazy.
it's
I never anticipated coming upon that testimony during our investigations of this case. I mean, it took 12 years to find that out. And you know, you got these witnesses that they were not looking for us. We found them. When we arrived at their house, they did not want to go on camera. They had no interest in selling their story. They weren't trying to sell their story. In fact, they didn't even want to be on camera. They want their names used. Like, why on earth would they make that up? You know, it's pretty remarkable.
As your research progressed on the case, you came to believe that the US military got involved at some point. If you're able to discuss it, what evidence did you encounter to make you suspect their involvement?
Well, so very early uh, on this last trip, I defined very simple objectives. And one was going to be, okay, I want to figure out like what happened, and if this UFO did really crash, where did the debris and the bodies ultimately end up? So every military person that we met with, we'd ask them, do you have any idea like what happened? And they would say the United States, excuse me, Estados Unidos, Estados Unidos. And then when we got closer and closer to better and better sources, it was Estados Unidos. And then we got, to our amazement, we got testimony from a flight control officer who had direct information that a flight came in. So we had testimony from a military officer who drove the creature from Humanitas Hospital in Varginha to as a military base, and then Espesex Unicomp in Campinas, in the town of Campinas. We had very good testimony from this guy who was definitely as a military base. Then we get this flight control officer in Brazil that has confirmation of a United States Air Force flight secretly flying in without authorization from the Brazilian government and lands in Campinas on January 22nd, 1996. And then they load something on this plane, and then where they had two helicopters go from Campinas to Varginha, Campinas, and then Campinas, they load something on this plane, and then off it goes back to the United States. I'd say it's pretty compelling.
This kind of leads me to ask about the craft, the crashed UFO, and bodies. Given all of your research and from what you've heard, where do you suspect the crash wreckage and bodies are currently stored or being examined still? In Brazil or in the United States?
My understanding is it's in the United States. Where in the United States, I haven't got a clue. I really don't. I'd like to find that out, but poof, I haven't got a clue.
Do you suspect that the USA has some kind of like global jurisdiction over UFO crash recoveries? I mean, I doubt it would have such influence in like Russia, Iran, or China. But what do you think about these often spoken of theory, which many ufologists have mentioned before?
Well, It's funny actually, because after every compelling UFO encounter that I've heard, um, even in the 1976 Parviz Jafari UFO incident over Tehran, Iran, there was a U.S. presence there the following morning. I've heard that so many times. That's why when like ATIP was revealed on the front page of the New York Times, like, oh, there's this organization in the Pentagon investigating UFOs. I'm like, yeah, they never stopped. When they terminated Blue Book in '69, that never stopped. It just went underground. But I don't really have any much more information than that there is this agency that has an uncanny ability to uh, identify, UFO incidences around the world and get directly involved within hours. I don't know how they do it. I have no idea, and I don't know where the stuff goes once it leaves that country. I'm going to make further inquiries, but it's an ongoing investigation. I just don't know.
Are there any other cases you would like to cover and work on in Brazil?
Colares, 1977.
That's one of my favorite cases. It really, really is. So if you make a documentary on that, I think I'll automatically be your biggest fan. I'm already biggest fan with this latest film and the one before that one. But if you do one on Colares, Brazil,
Uh,
wow.
yeah, so we are in touch with a witness right now who's seen the videotaped evidence that was taken by the Brazilian Air Force in 1977 of an object that's bigger than a football field coming out of the Amazon.
Very quickly, for those that aren't familiar with this case, can you explain it to us? Colares, Brazil, 1977.
Well, it was an ongoing Colares. I believe Colares is an island, but it's off to the north. And I haven't investigated in depth with this. Jacques Vallée has. He's written books about it. But basically, it was an ongoing UFO incident that included close encounters of the third kind. The Brazilian Air Force was involved. The United States was involved. They had these objects, people claiming these beams of light were coming down and striking people. People were getting sick. And it went on for quite some time. I mean, a year or two. I couldn't tell you exactly, but it was, and there's tons and tons of official Brazilian Air Force photographic evidence that's been released to the general public that's remarkable, and that there are witnesses within the Brazilian Air Force that have come clean. We've got one of them featured in Moment of Contact, because we do a snapshot history of Brazil in Moment of Contact. Fascinating case.
It is. Now, in your years of creating films, speaking to specialists in the field, and documenting your way through it all, have you ever been in a situation where you were confronted by someone that was misleading you with information?
No. One time when I did the National Press Club event with Leslie Kean in 2007, I got an email, and I was on Larry King a bunch of times. I got kind of a lot of traction publicly. I got an email that said, "Stop doing what you're doing, or we'll put you to Z." And it had the Z's, like a big Z and then smaller Z's, and went down to small Z's. That was a little spooky. Could have just been, who knows what it was. In terms of someone trying to feed me disinformation, I mean, I've had people like tell me some crazy stories, and I say, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
That's just how it needs to be, I think.
And I feel like when I'm making a documentary, I think about presenting my case to a jury. Can I create a significant argument beyond a shadow of doubt, or beyond reasonable doubt, that this happened or didn't happen? And I feel like with Moment of Contact, with the phenomenon, we've managed to present a very compelling case to the jury.
And that leads me to my final question for today. What are you hoping that the documentary will achieve all these years later after the event? I mean, is this just to bring exposure to the case, or is this a first step in creaking open the doors of secrecy and bringing legitimacy to a story that got so much ridicule over the years?
I hope that it will encourage further witnesses, both Brazilian and the United States, to come forward. I hope that it will open the minds of the general public to the likelihood of an event like this having occurred. And I hope that we will continue pushing even harder for further government transparency on this topic. So kind of all of the above.
James, thank you so much for being on Shifting the Paradigm. Where can people find you online to stay up to date with you and your work? And where can they find Moment of Contact?
So Moment of Contact is available on iTunes, Vimeo, I think Hulu, Amazon, Fandango, a whole slew of things. You can Google it. If you Google the trailer online on YouTube, within the specifics on the trailer, it'll give the link. One thing I would ask, if your audience wouldn't mind taking a moment and rating the film, if you enjoyed it, give it a little rating. It's really helpful for the algorithms and makes it more out there and more popular, and more people can go and see it. Did I answer all your questions?
Yes.
Okay, good.
You did. Thanks, James.
Thanks for having me on.
You're listening to the UNX Network, KUNX-DB, Kansas City, Missouri.
It was an absolute pleasure to speak with James and to hear all of his insights on his latest film. All of his social media links and where to watch the documentary are below. Check out my website at strangeparadigms.com for all show archives in podcast and video formats, along with guest appearances and all of my social media links, such as Discord, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and more. Follow me on Twitter at eyes_on_the skies to catch all of my updates and news. I want to wish you all a wonderful week. Please like this video or podcast on your platform of choice and share it with those who have the same interests. Subscribe if you haven't already, because there's a lot more great shows coming to you soon. Be safe, and remember, keep your eyes on the skies.